Who's ready for something spooky? Lovely ladies and gentlemen, viewers, I have for you three, possibly four, if we have time, scary stories written by myself and my fiance. Listen closely, and I hope you enjoy. The first story is called Across the Hall. Sound a little quiet? Oh, odd. Filters shouldn't be altered. Hmm. No, no model today. Is it still not working? Is the audio not working well? Sounds better. I didn't do anything, but here we go. Mhm. The first story is called Across the Hall. The hum of the fan on the ceiling at medium speed filled Michael's ears. He didn't like the high speed on account of it shaking like it was about to fall off, and the low speed didn't make enough sound for him. He stared up at the ceiling, counting the dots again. Michael turned his head, looking at the clock again for the 54th time. Only 4:15 a.m. He had another 3 hours until he had to get up and start the day. He closed his eyes for another attempt to fall back asleep and begin to count to himself. 1, 2, 3, 4. He got to about 400 when the moonlight finally reached his eyes, peeking through the broken gaps in the blinds. Michael groaned as he opened his eyes and got up from his bed, walking over to the window. He had requested maintenance again to replace the blinds several weeks ago, but they never got back to him. They didn't respond the first time, and the seventh time wasn't going to be any different. The tape he had up in the blinds was once again falling from where he put it. Michael ran his fingers through his hair as he stared out the window, thinking about how good the usual night's sleep was. The fact that he had to try and recall it only caused his fingers to tense up, tugging at his hair. He looked across the alleyway and into his alley neighbor's window, Mrs. Thompson. He had grown accustomed to the sight of her empty bedroom from what little bit he could see during the day. She had green wallpaper with a ornate yellow pattern, but at night it all just looked blue and gray. The bed remained untouched, as it has been for the past 7 months since Michael moved in. To the left was a dresser with a large vanity mirror covered up by a quilt made of t-shirts. The remnants of makeup and various papers were strewn about on the dresser. Some nights, when the night was full, Michael could almost make out what the papers said. On the back of the door hung a single blue plaid shirt with buttons on the right side and 8 holes for moths enjoying the feast. Sometimes Michael would occupy his time by imagining what she had beyond the little window into her life that he could see. Perhaps she had posters of films that she enjoyed, or pictures of her life before she moved to this place. Mrs. Thompson did never mind Michael looking into the bedroom. She never used the she never used the room, much preferring to sleep on the couch. Michael had never seen her open this room before, even when she had guests over. The few times that Michael had visited her, she was quick to make sure that he never got close to the door. She always had some reason or another to push Michael out and lock the door behind him. Michael turned his attention to the left where the window into Mrs. Thompson's living room was. He expected to see nothing but the dark room, the green and yellow wallpaper illuminated by the moonlight. With this much moonlight tonight, he could probably see the picture she kept hung up of her time in ballet school. He didn't expect to see Mrs. Thompson looking out the window, and, much less, he didn't expect her to turn her eyes to look at him. A chill ran through his spine as he quickly backed away from the window and out of sight. There was no reason for her to be awake. Maybe she was experiencing a bad bout of insomnia, like he was, or had to use the bathroom. He must have just been seeing things from his lack of sleep. Slowly he reapproached the window and looked towards Mrs. Thompson's living room. All he saw was the green and yellow wallpaper and a bit of the picture of her at ballet school. It was simply a trick of the light mixed with his insomnia. He hadn't seen her. At least, that's what he thought before he turned to Mrs. Thompson's bedroom. There, cloaked in the darkness, but with just enough moonlight to make out her figure, was Mrs. Thompson. She was staring right at him, with her eyes wide and almost glowing. She had a large grin on her face, one that stretched farther across her face than humanly possible. Michael didn't get much more time to notice any other details, as he recoiled from the window hard enough that he ended up flat on his back. The ceiling fan shook as he stared up at it, processing what he had just seen. Every fiber in his being was shouting at him to get back into bed and close his eyes until the morning came. He had to be delirious. It was just a hallucination, and yet, at the same time, as if possessed by curiosity, Michael pulled himself towards the window frame. He raised his head up, just enough to see over the edge of the frame. Just yellow and green wallpaper, the untouched bed, the blue plaid shirt, and the dresser with the quilt over it. Not a single sign of Mrs. Thompson at all. The shirt on the back of the door didn't even look disturbed in the slightest. His eyes darted over to the living room, only to see the green and yellow wallpaper and the picture of Mrs. Thompson from ballet school. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. Whatever it is that he had seen clearly wasn't real. He crawled back into bed and closed his eyes as he tried to fall back asleep. But as he did, the image of Mrs. Thompson that he had seen was practically burned into his retinas. As much as he tried, he couldn't get it out of his mind. It stuck with him in a way he couldn't quite explain, and he could feel shivers in his core. He attempted to distract himself by counting more. Before he knew it, his alarm clock screeched to life. Michael reached over and shut off the alarm, groaning as he sat up. He had managed to push the image of Mrs. Thompson to the back of his mind. Michael got up and went about his usual routine, getting dressed, then eating a bowl of sugary cornflakes with a cup of black coffee. He brushed his teeth and gathered his things for the day. As he locked the door behind him, he saw Bill, also leaving his apartment to head to work. Michael waved to him, and the two of them began to walk to the elevator.
Morning, Michael. So, ready for another exciting day?
Bill asked, pressing the first floor button. No, I had an awful night, Michael said with a yawn. It got bad last night. I was saying things.
Saying things? What was it? Cats in the cabinet? Mistake your toothbrush for a hairbrush?
Bill laughed, despite Michael's plight. No, Michael said, shaking his head as he tried to keep pushing the image out of his mind. Last night, last night, I saw Mrs. Thompson. Not like in my apartment, but I swear I saw her looking out her window and her eyes were glowing. She was smiling and looking at me. But then I looked and she was gone. Wild, right? Michael turned to Bill, who was wearing his usual goofy smile, trying to make light of Michael's rough night.
Oh, come on now. That's just a wild story. Come on. She's just a nice old lady. What would she be doing up so late, anyways? You need some more sleep, buddy.
He put his arm around Michael and laughed. Trust me, I know, Michael said, still unsure about whether or not what he had seen was real or not. It couldn't have been. There was no way that it was. The elevator doors opened up and the two of them stepped out.
You get yourself some sleep tonight, you hear? And don't be staring in the windows. Come on. You know that's weird.
Bill said with a hearty laugh before leaving the lobby. Oh, I told you. She said it's okay, Michael shouted to Bill before he got out of earshot. Michael turned to the mailboxes to check whether or not there was anything for him. He opened it up, seeing nothing but the usual flyers and junk mail for stuff he couldn't possibly care less for. He bunched it up and tossed it into the trash. As he did, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Michael turned to see Mrs. Thompson and a set of grocery bags on her arms. Ah, good morning, Michael, Mrs. Thompson said as she smiled warmly at him. A shiver went down Michael's spine as his mind flashed to the eerie smile from last night. But today her smile was the usual warmth it always was. Good morning, Mrs. Thompson, Michael said, shaking off the nerves. There was nothing to be worried about. Did you sleep well last night? Oh, like a log, she said as she checked her mailbox. Maybe it was to satiate his curiosity or ease his mind, but Michael found himself speaking up before he even knew it. So, you slept all night? You didn't wake up at all? Nope, not a single time, Mrs. Thompson said, as she tucked away the important mail and put the rest into the trash. That's good. You wouldn't happen to have remedies for insomnia? I had a terrible case of it last night, and I'd hate to go through it again, Michael said, wondering if this might lead anywhere. Oh, I might have something to do the trick, but it might take me a bit, Mrs. Thompson said, as she crossed her arms to think. Yeah, it was really bad. I think I hallucinated or something, Michael said, before chuckling at how ridiculous this had all got. I mean, I even thought I saw you last night in your window. What? Mrs. Thompson's tone dropped. Michael had never heard her be so serious before. Yeah, I thought I saw you smiling at me from your window. I even thought I saw you in your bedroom that you always. Oh, excuse me, look at the time. There's a flash sale at the grocery store that I'm late for. Mrs. Thompson practically pushed Michael to the side as she hurried out of the lobby. Michael stared as she left. For the most part, he was confused about what just happened, but, more importantly, there was a tightness in his chest that he didn't notice before he released it. He shivered as he shook over the feelings and tried to go about his day. He wanted to drop the memory and tried to keep forgetting about it throughout all of work and his errands, but it continued to weigh on him no matter what he did. That night he set an alarm for 4:15 a.m. the time that he would have seen Mrs. Thompson in her window. He wasn't sure what he would see, or if there was anything to see, but for his own sanity he had to put his worries to ease. Slowly he began to count himself as he closed his eyes. When his alarm went off, he made his way over to the window and looked into Mrs. Thompson's apartment. All he saw was the green and yellow wallpaper, the bed, the clothes, the photos on the wall. Nothing had changed at all, and there was no Mrs. Thompson watching him. As he turned away, he couldn't believe what he was doing. He had set an alarm for the middle of the night to look into his neighbor's apartment. He was letting this hallucination go to his head. Despite telling him that, he couldn't help but feel the growing tension in his chest. He turned back around to Mrs. Thompson's apartment, half expecting to just see something. Still, just the same wallpaper, bed, clothes, and photo. He was about to crawl into bed when he heard something rustling in his kitchen. It was probably the mice again. Michael sighed and grabbed the baseball bat that he kept by his bed and slowly walked in the kitchen, looking around. He listened closely for any skittering, but it was silent inside of his apartment. He opened up cabinet after cabinet to try and find the rustling, but the mice must have already fled. Michael sighed and turned to head back to bed. That's when he saw it for a brief second out of the corner of his eye. He saw it through the window of his living room into hers, Mrs. Thompson staring at him with a wide, toothy grin and glowing eyes, though it almost felt like the eyes were a little too wide. Then Michael blinked and she was gone. He rushed back to his bedroom to see if he could find her in the bedroom, but it was nothing but the wallpaper, clothes, dresser, and bed. He looked again to the living room window, seeing nothing but the wallpaper and the photo. Michael ran his fingers through his hair again and began to count to himself as he lay back on the bed. He clearly needed more sleep. The next thing he knew, it was morning again. Michael went about his usual morning routine and talked with Bill, though he refrained from mentioning the events of last night. He stretched and rubbed his neck. It didn't feel like he slept a lot last night, but more just like dissociating until the morning. This day, Mrs. Thompson didn't come down and check her mail like usual. The night rolled around as Michael gripped onto his baseball bat. Maybe it was for some semblance of protection or control. It was already 3 in the morning, but at least tomorrow was Saturday. Still, despite the dreariness wrapping around him like a warm blanket, he kept his eyes fixed on Mrs. Thompson's apartment. His eyes darted between the 2 windows, hoping to see anything. His eyes blinked slowly, each one longer than the last, and his body began to sway. A soft chuckle escaped his lips. Here he was so he could stare into his neighbor's apartment just in case she looks at him from the middle of the night. To anyone else, it would sound insane. To him, he sounded insane. He rested his eyes for a few seconds, then opened them. There she was, inside the living room, staring at him with her eyes wide that seemed to glow and her toothy grin that stretched further than her face. She watched Michael, and Michael could not move. Every ounce of him was screaming to run and flee, but his body wouldn't cooperate with his brain. All he could do was stare ahead, trying to process what he was looking at. It had all the same hair as Mrs. Thompson and was wearing clothes that she would normally would. If it weren't for the face, it could easily be mistaken for Mrs. Thompson. But that face, that inhuman face, pierced Michael's gaze and shook him down deep to his core. Then she raised a finger to her face, a finger at least twice as long as normal, and held it in front of her teeth. Michael felt his vision begin to blur before his eyes shut. His body rocked back and he hit the floor. When his eyes shot open, it was late into the morning. He bolted upright and looked into Mrs. Thompson's apartment, finding nothing disturbed at all. It was as if nothing happened, but it absolutely did happen. He held his head. What he saw last night was definitely not a hallucination. It felt all too real. The chill still hadn't left his spine. He had to tell someone about it. Michael ran over and knocked on the door to Bill's apartment. He heard a bit of shuffling before Bill came out, looking very confused at the frightened Michael.
What's got you all out of sorts?
I saw her, Michael said, grabbing Bill by the shoulder. I saw Mrs. Thompson staring at me last night, and she wasn't human. Her mouth was wide, and her fingers were long.
Michael, you need to get some sleep,
Bill said, shrugging off Michael and taking his hand off of him.
Mrs. Thompson is just a kind old lady. You clearly haven't been sleeping well, and it's really starting to affect you.
No, I know what I saw, Michael shouted, tossing Bill's hands aside. Something is wrong with Mrs. Thompson. Bill shook his head.
You're clearly just tired, and you look like a mess. Now leave this ridiculousness alone before you give my kids any idea.
Before Michael could respond, Bill already shut and locked the door. I'm telling you, I saw it, Michael shouted before stomping back to his apartment. He could hear one parent hustling their kids away, but he didn't care right now. What was important was figuring out what was going on, and if he was going to do so, he had to have some proof. The only way he was going to get that was to catch it on video. Michael drove to the nearest tech store, buying a few tripods before rushing back home. A few more apartment complex residents shuffled out of his way as he muttered something about proving Bill wrong. He waited until nighttime to start setting up the cameras, just in case Mrs. Thompson did anything different because of the presence of the cameras. He watched as Mrs. Thompson turned off the lights and laid down on her couch. Then he propped up the cameras, one looking at her living room and the other at her bedroom. As the night passed to 3:30 a.m., Michael brewed another fresh pot of coffee, pacing back and forth between his kitchen and bedroom. He continued to check the cameras, making sure they had enough battery life and deleting old footage that didn't have anything. Michael's hands shook as he raised his mug to his lips. Whether the shakes were from the caffeine, lack of sleep, or nerves, he didn't care. As long as he was shaking, he was awake and watching. Then he saw her through his living room window. She sat up from her couch before her head turned around 180 degrees like an owl. Her eyes opened up wide and her mouth became stretched out again. Michael backed away, not quite out of fear, but almost as if something was compelling him to get away. Then he felt the cord of the camera tangle up between his feet. Michael fell backwards and hit the floor of his kitchen, blacking out instantly. Michael groaned awake as he tried to get up from his groggy state. It wasn't until he saw the shattered mug and puddle of coffee that he remembered what happened last night. He grabbed the camera at his feet and looked through the footage to the time that he saw her. There she was, looking at the camera. Michael scrambled to his feet, holding the camera, and rushed to Bill's apartment, pounding his fist on the door. Bill! Open up! Bill! Bill! Bill sighed and as he opened up the door.
What is it now, Michael? It better not be something bad.
It's Mrs. Thompson. Bill attempted to shut the door on Michael, but Michael kept his foot in the door. Wait, I have proof. I know what I saw. He fumbled a bit with the camera before playing Bill the video. Bill looked at the camera with a confused look before clearing his throat.
Michael, why are you filming into someone else's apartment?
Bill asked in a serious tone. What? Michael asked, still a little breathless. It's to get proof. I didn't hallucinate it. See, there she is.
Michael, there's nothing there.
Bill said as he took the camera and replayed the footage for Michael. All Michael could see was the green and yellow wallpaper, illuminated by the moonlight throughout the whole video when Mrs. Thompson was supposed to show up. No, this can't be, Michael shouted as he grabbed the camera and looked throughout all the files. This can't be. It was right there. I saw it. She was in there.
Michael,
Bill said as he shooed Michael out of the door.
you're really starting to lose it now. Get yourself some sleep and quit it with all this nonsense. And get rid of those cameras before I report you to the building manager for an invasion of privacy.
Bill slammed the door into Michael's face, practically knocking Michael onto the floor again. Michael heard the door double locking. I saw it! I saw her! Bill, open up! Open up, damn it! Michael shouted, but there wasn't any response. He looked down the hallway as he got up, seeing more families and people rush out of sight and earshot of his rage. I'll show you! I'll show all of you! Just you wait! Michael spent the rest of the day psyching himself up and checking into Mrs. Thompson's apartment for any changes or clues that would reveal something. But there wasn't anything new. When the night rolled around, Michael gripped tightly onto his baseball bat. Catching her on film wasn't enough. Watching this from a distance wasn't going to be enough. He would have to confront her. He waited with bated breath, his leg bouncing in anticipation. It wouldn't be long before she awoke. A million thoughts raced through his mind as he stared. What was she? Why was she just now appearing to him? Why did her eyes glow? How did she get into the room? How did she disappear so quickly? Why didn't she appear on camera? He was going to ask her everything. He was going to reveal everything. Then he saw her, the faint outline of Mrs. Thompson, rise up from the couch. But this time, instead of just watching her, Michael rushed out of his apartment. He barely put on his slippers as he flung open his door. Michael sprinted throughout the apartment complex, all the way to Mrs. Thompson's apartment. He slammed on the door with all his might. Mrs. Thompson, open up! Michael shouted. There was a stirring before Mrs. Thompson, wearing her nightwear, opened up the door and rubbed her eyes.
Michael, what are you doing? What's wrong?
Mrs. Thompson, let me in!
Michael!
Michael pushed his way in and shoved Mrs. Thompson. He looked around her apartment, seeing nothing changing. He ran his fingers through his hair and pointed his bat at Mrs. Thompson. What are you? I saw that figure, and that was you. What are you? Start explaining. Now!
Michael, please, you're scaring me,
Mrs. Thompson said, gesturing to the front door.
Please, just leave. Take whatever you want and just leave.
No! Michael shouted. I just want the truth. He waved the bat as he staggered, the exhaustion of rushing over here starting to catch up to him. What are you?
I don't know what you're talking about,
Mrs. Thompson said as her hands shook.
Please, you have to leave now.
Not without answers. Michael gripped tighter onto the bat, his frustration starting to build in him. He panted heavily as he used his free hands to run his fingers through his hair. Tell me what you are.
Michael, please, you have to leave now.
Mrs. Thompson pleaded. Her eyes darted over to the bedroom door subconsciously. However, that brief movement was all Michael needed. What are you hiding? Show me! Michael said as he twisted the doorknob and threw the bedroom door wide open. At long last, Michael managed to see what was on the wall. The green and yellow wallpaper was on the other side of the wall, and some inky black webbing stuck into the corner out of sight. Michael briefly saw the glowing eyes and wide grin of Mrs. Thompson, or whatever the figure he had been seeing the past few nights, as it lunged at him. His baseball bat clattered to the ground As Mrs. Thompson shook her head, she stepped out into the hallway and looked at all the people who started to gather from Michael's stunt. "Don't worry, dearies. He's just been having a hard time sleeping. But I gave him some nice tea, and he's resting inside," Mrs. Thompson said, smiling with her usual warmth. That was enough for the onlookers to dissipate. After all, Mrs. Thompson was just a nice, kind old lady. She even heard someone complimenting how nice of a woman she was before she shut and locked her door. That is the end of Across the Hall. I hope you all enjoy. The next story is written by my lovely fiance. It is called Marry the Beloved. I don't know. Possibly not due to time constraints, Chippy. I'm sorry. But who knows? Maybe in the future. But here is Mary the Beloved. I sat upon the hill, looking at the unmarked mass grave below. Inside were hundreds of dead women, all condemned witches. These women suffered awful deaths, burning alive as they screamed for mercy at the hands of men and women who thought themselves self-righteous. As the sun started to set, I thought about what led to these dead. Was it worth it? Did I do the right thing? I lived in a world where witches did business with humans in exchange for living peacefully. The two agreed to never intermix, as humans considered the breeding to taint the bloodline, while witches thought humans would weaken it. This did not stop my father from seducing a witch to his side. The promise of love and power from his position. My father, a moronic noble of the land, thought having a witch bear his child would give him the ability to take the kingdom for himself. My mother, the lovely woman she was, did not care about power or nobility, as she only wanted a family. She was the weakest witch of her tribe, but still stronger than any human. No witch wanted to have a family with someone so pathetic, so my mother fell for my father very hard. She did everything he said, even kept the pregnancy a secret until it was time. My father didn't care for her love, just her potential. The moment I was born, all hell broke loose. Word spread quickly throughout the witch community that a half-child was born, which led to the news going through the human community. My mother thought my father would protect her, but he was a bastard of a coward. When my mother swore it was him, and I looked like his infant, he claimed dark magic at work. My mother had cursed him. He had no choice. He claimed he would die if he did not give her his sperm. All lies that the kingdom was willing to swallow, more than the idea that a man deceived a woman, especially a man with something to lose. My mother was devastated by the betrayal, but still felt blessed by my birth. She named me Mary, meaning the beloved. The betrayal did not last long, as my mother's life did not last much longer after my birth. The humans thought my mother needed to be punished for the noble's lies. The witches did nothing to protect her, the weakest of her kind. I was taken away from my mother. I do not remember what she looked like alive, but I do remember her screaming, crying out for someone to save her, as I cried for my mother. Unbeknownst to both sides, my mother's spirit was stronger than what a fire could burn away. Even as I was dumped in the woods by the humans, my mother's spirit took care of me. I stayed hidden from the humans. She didn't want anyone taking her child. She taught me what little magic she could, giving me the tools for survival. Will I ever be able to live in a house? I would ask my mother. Maybe one day. Will I ever be able to eat something fancy like other girls my age? Maybe one day. Will they ever love me for who I am? Never. While humans didn't care whether I was alive or dead, the witches were annoyed by my existence. They thought I was a disgrace to witch kind, making the bloodline weaker by just existing. They were all too kind to kill me. They wanted to use me as an example as to why you should never breed with a human, and what will happen to your child if you do, as if my mother's fate was not enough. Before I had my first blood, I was cursed by other witches with a demon. While I do not know the details of my cursing, I do know that they did not want to use many resources in cursing me, as they did not think that I was worth the effort. This resulted in a half-demon being called to haunt me, Lilith. Lilith looked more human than she did demon, but it was clear she was not human nor a witch. She came to me while I slept, my mother trying to protect me from the approaching creature. I woke up to a loud, magical popping. Lilith easily deflected any spell my mother threw. She took one look at me and introduced herself. Hello, child. I am Lilith. My nose may not be strong, but I can tell you are not quite a witch, but not quite a human. I'm the same way. Not quite a human, but not quite a demon. I can feel there is hate in your heart, a want to be fitting, but a refusal by everyone else. Personally, I am appalled that I was summoned using so little to harm someone innocent of any crime. I think I can help you. While my mother taught me magic to survive, Lilith was able to teach me magic to thrive. Even though Lilith was considered the weakest demon, she was still stronger than any witch. She infused me with a magic no other witch was given access to, all for the sake of revenge. The more spells I learned, the stronger I could feel myself become. I started small, making my way through the local villages, using dark magic my father claimed my mother used to take small things, trick people into fights, making things just a bit harder for people I felt deserved it. As I grew stronger, I started to take more control, spreading rumors that were infused with magic of the misdeeds of nobility, as I learned that words were the strongest magic available. Starting small, maybe one had a husband who liked the village whore, another collected skulls of popes, going as far as to proclaim murder. But my magic proved true. No one could prove it was me who started any rumors, and all were eventually treated as fact rather than baseless gossip. This was only the beginning of my abilities. Once the witches noticed my power, it was far too late. I spread the rumors of other witches using dark magic, threatening human safety, wanting to control the kingdom for themselves, or worse, interbreeding and mixing with their society. The idea that witches might want to live alongside humans was horrifying enough, but creating more freaks like me, that was despicable. Even if they didn't know the one spreading all of these lies was the one they were trying to condemn. Nobility got nervous, including my own father. I refused to spread any rumors about my father, as I wanted him to live with what I knew was coming. It started slow. A few witches that looked like they were breaking laws, even if those laws were misconstrued. It snowballed into tribes being burned, surrounded by soldiers the nobles hired to stop any witches from escaping the burning. I made sure the spell attached to the rumor was strong enough to go beyond the kingdom, reaching to the farthest corners of the map. If there were any witches left, they weren't alive for long. No one was able to come back. I made sure of it with wards other witches could have only dreamed of. The humans, proud that they extinguished the fraudulent threat, started to face the consequences of their action. They didn't realize how much they used magic in their everyday until every witch was in the ground. Sickness was more common. people dying left and right as the humans entered a new, dark age. Even after all the witches were dead, they were still too proud to say that they were wrong. And they started to drop like flies to a new problem they thought they would have to deal with. I took to the shadows, refusing to help those who refused to help me. As the sun set, I could see my mother's spirit glow alongside me as well as Lilith walking out of the darkness. I looked to the moon, feeling the power within me surge while I walked down the top of the corpses of my fake sisters. Are you happy? Lilith asked on my saunter down the hill. Very, I answered candidly. When you're the last witch, what will you do? I spun around, looking at my personal demon and spirit, and smiled. Whatever I want. As I skipped down the hill, past unmarked graves of witches who would be forgotten to history, a smile grew on my face. I was almost there. I only had one thing left to take care of. I slowed down my saunter to an amble as I approached the darkened forest. What used to be a lively forest filled with magic and camaraderie turned to a burnt crisp of blackened trees and rotting bones by hateful humans. I reveled in the scent of my dead kin. The darkness consumed my form as I walked further in. Soon I heard a slight whimper ahead. My speed did not change. It mattered not if I found the source of the sound now or in a few years. No one would find it but me. Up ahead I saw her, the last witch of all the covens. I had asked Lilith to gather her. She had been hiding from me for quite some time. Her spells were strong, but they were no match for love. The witch had stopped her whimpering as I reached for her gag. I ripped it straight from her mouth, a tooth pulling out from the force. Her mouth started to bleed the same way her makeup had been since she started crying. Lilith chuckled while my mother howled with joy. The witch was scared, as she should be. When were you born? I asked, no change in my demeanor. You bitch! You killed everyone! How could you walk around without any sadness? She was defiant, but it didn't matter. I asked again, where were you born? I would appreciate the extra time you have. She swallowed her pride. Maybe she realized the difference in power in my voice. 12 years after the red lunar moon. I smiled. You're my age. How lucky I am that you're my age and the last one. Do you know what that means? As the witch tried to answer me, I picked her up by the throat with ease. It means you were one of the witches to help curse me, and I think a curse for a curse should suffice. With words beyond my language, the witch's body glowed under the moonlight, brighter than my own mother's spirit. Once the glow dimmed, I dropped the witch to the ground. What did you do to me? She asked. She was as pathetic as I thought she would be. All the witches were. None of them could recognize a demon's curse when it was attached to them. I scoffed at the ignorance. You would think someone in the coven would recognize a soul banishment. But I guess you underestimated your strength when I started. Her face turned pale, all the blood leaving as she started to understand what I meant. You did this to everyone, she whimpered. I couldn't have you guys coming back to haunt me, now could I? Besides, darkness isn't all that bad. Darkness is what you witches left me to, after all. Lilith, you can take care of the rest. The witch's scream was cut short by a wet slice. In an instant, I could feel myself become the only witch on the planet. I shuddered with delight. No one could stop me from whatever I wanted to do. Now what, my beloved daughter? My mother wailed. I am going to watch the humans destroy themselves as they forget that witches were ever real. And that was Mary the Beloved, written by my fiance. And now, the next story. This one is titled Adrian. Adrian sat across from me at the dinner table, poking away at his pork chops and green beans with a side of mashed potatoes. He was smiling wide as he ate, listening attentively to the conversations that were happening between my mother and my sister. The smell of pork chops and mashed potatoes kept drawing my attention, wanting me to look down and snarf down every bit of them, but I couldn't afford to. I had to watch Adrian, my brother. I couldn't let him out of my sight. Whatever Adrian is, he couldn't be my brother. I don't have a brother. And yet, here he sat, like there wasn't a care in the world. He used his knife in his left hand and his fork in his right, holding it like any of us would. I kept watching, hoping that maybe there'd be something that he'd slip up with. But there was nothing. He just kept cutting off pieces of pork chop and sticking them in his mouth before chewing.
So, how are things at home? Things at school, Adrian? Been passing all your classes?
My father asked as he poured himself another glass of water. Adrian never went to school because Adrian doesn't exist. So while he's not failing his classes, he shouldn't be passing them either.
Ah, the same as always.
Adrian said as he picked up the pitcher and poured water for himself as well. I watched as the pitcher poured, as the water poured from the pitcher to the glass, losing the proper amount of water.
Miss Venti has been really cracking down hard on the tests lately, and her lectures are so boring.
I warned you about it, my sister said, pointing a green bean on the end of her fork at Adrian. My sister was now in her third year of college and was majoring in business. She had these big, elaborate plans about making it big in a small town by building up some small business into a national brand. My parents always supported her. I thought her dreams were a bit lofty. Adrian said that he supported her and hoped that she could make it big to help him pay for college. My sister laughed that suggestion off as a joke, and they both laughed.
Well, I think she remembers you because it seems like she has it out for me.
Adrian said, wadding up a paper towel and tossing it at her. My sister laughed as she failed to block the ball, hitting her in the face. She went to throw it back at Adrian when my mother reached her hand out and put it in front of her. Now that's enough. No fighting at the dinner table, okay? Okay. Both Adrian and my sister's shoulders relaxed as they leaned back into their chairs and went back to their food. Now, how have things been for you? You've been quiet.
Yeah. What's new with you? Are your classes going well?
Adrian asked, sipping his water. I watched his lips, hoping to see a slight hint of a smirk or something, as if hiding behind the clear glass and clear liquid could hide his pride. But he just sipped like normal and set his cup down.
Passing all your tests?
Yeah, I said, picking up a scoop of mashed potatoes with my fork. I could feel the strain in my eyes. I was trying my hardest not to blink, worried that if I did, I would miss something, or that Adrian would take the opportunity to do something. I didn't know what, but I wouldn't let it happen. The pain in my eyes was strong, but I mustered up the will to hold back the natural urge. Everything's going well, Adrian.
That's awesome. Knew I wouldn't have to worry about either of my big sisters.
I had to restrain myself from snapping my fork as he said that last bit. He said it like it was normal, like there weren't any issues with him saying
You should you should keep worrying about yourself. Mrs. Vance's midterms are hell. You better be studying.
my sister said between bites of pork chop.
Oh, come on now. Don't talk with your mouth full.
My father said after swallowing a bite.
It's rude and gross.
Ah, sorry, she said, holding her fist to her mouth before swallowing. Bad habits die hard, you know.
Oh, I know, Adrian said with a laugh. Remember that time at the ski resort and you were just so excited to talk about that taxidermy bear in the lobby that you got french fries all over Mom?
Everyone laughed as they remembered that. I vividly remember that because I was there. Adrian was not. Adrian doesn't exist. Adrian didn't exist. She got so mad because it was so hard to wipe things off when you were wearing those huge gloves, my sister said, failing to control her laughter. They made such a mess, but they were warm, my mother said, smiling and rolling her eyes.
We should go back to that resort sometime, maybe for a Christmas break,
Adrian suggested, turning towards my father.
Depends on how well your grades are,
my father said, wiping some gravy from his chin.
Money's been tight this year.
My father's been off and on odd jobs this year after getting laid off from his office job back in February. On the one hand, he didn't come home exhausted and frustrated all the time. On the other hand, we had to tighten up our belts a little and turn down things we normally would have done. We even had to do a staycation this year instead of going to the beach like we always did. Just the four of us. Only the four of us. There are only four of us. Then I guess it's time I share some of my good news. I was going to save this for dessert, but now's as good a time as any, my mother said as she pulled out her phone. She swiped a few times before turning the screen to us, showing an acceptance email to an art gallery. What? No way! Mom, you got in? My sister exclaimed, a little breathless. Yep. My mother's smile stretched practically from ear to ear. All the hard work and networking finally paid off. I'm going to have several of my art pieces in a gallery, up and up for auction at the same time.
Oh, congratulations, honey.
My father clapped first, then my sister, then Adrian, and then, finally, me. My mother had been trying for so long. Now her pieces will hang on someone else's walls. I always appreciated her art style, but I did get annoyed by how often she would ask us to pose for her. My sister didn't quite get it, but was always willing to try and help my mother sell her art. Now, the gallery is in January. I hope that you'll all be able to come and see it, but I know that you all might be busy with schoolwork, so if you can't, it's all right, my mother said, putting away her phone. Nonsense, my sister said. Of course I'm going to be there. Who else is going to help you haggle a good deal for your artwork? My sister chuckled like she was about to be the next big dog selling penny stocks on Wall Street.
That's right, Adrian said as he finished up the last of his meal. I'll definitely make sure that I'm going to be there. Nothing could stop me.
Adrian turned to me, his gaze practically staring into my soul. I couldn't help but gulp as he looked. He was smiling, and it almost looked genuine. But I have to remind myself that it couldn't be.
What about you? Don't you have that, what was it, slavery history meetup thing that day?
Slavic. It's Slavic history, I corrected Adrian. And for something as important as this, I will find a way to be there.
Right, Slavic. That's what it was.
Adrian said with a chuckle. A meat? What kind of meat? My mother asked. It was only natural that she would ask me. I hadn't told anyone about it yet. It's a small gathering of scholars from around the country, I said, trying not to make a big deal out of it. They'll understand if I can't make it. Dear, you should go. It's not every day that you get to meet up with your academic peers like that. My mom always encouraged my interests, but I wanted to be there to support her. I waved her suggestion off with a shake of my head.
Honey, of course we're all gonna be there for you.
My father said, finishing up his plate as well.
Now, it's the cause to celebrate. I think I heard you mention something about dessert.
My mother laughed a little before standing up. Yes, I have a freshly baked key lime pie. Once everyone is finished, I'll get to it. Adrian, my father, and my mother all turned their heads towards me and my sister, who was still finishing up our plates.
Key lime pie? Don't have to tell me twice.
My sister shoveled the rest of the scraps on her plate into her mouth. I still had quite a bit left on my plate. No way I was going to be able to finish it as fast as she did. Still, I ate as fast as I could, but knowing that everyone was waiting on me to finish, I could feel the judgment weighing on me. The only way I was going to be able to finish reasonably quick was if I looked down at the food. And if I was looking at the food, I wasn't looking at Adrian. Was the hurried and excited looks of my family enough to make me turn away from Adrian, to let him out of my gaze? I bit my lower lip and, against all my better judgment, looked down at my food. I think that my mother and sister and father all talked about something as I ate. It didn't quite matter to me at the moment. All I could hear was the clinking of my utensils against my plate. I couldn't hear Adrian talking, or moving, or doing anything. There wasn't anything that told me he was still there, but nothing that told me he was doing anything either. I knew we were at the dinner table. I knew that the chairs squeaked loudly if anyone were to move them in the slightest, so I would have been able to tell. He was just there. Before I knew it, I finished my plate, and as I did, a sinking feeling formed in my gut. I wanted to look up. I wanted to see Adrian and know that he was still there. If he was still there, and at the same time, what would it mean if he was still there? My rationality still hadn't fully dismissed him being a very vivid hallucination, but my rationality also said that I didn't have a brother. I don't have a brother. There are only four of us. And yet, when I looked up from my plate and handed it over to my mother, there he was, smiling and sitting there at the table like nothing was wrong.
All right, she's finally finished.
Adrian cheered.
Now it's time for pie.
My sister and father cheered as my mother got up from the table and brought all the dishes and utensils to the sink. I could hear my mother going over to the oven to take out the pie. The oven opening filled the air with the scent of lime, but I couldn't turn to see it yet. My eyes were trained on Adrian. He was still there, smiling with excitement. My mother set the pie down in the middle of the table. She brought over a large knife and began to slice the pie up into 8 slices. Then she walked back to get small plates and distribute them out to everyone. Carefully, she put a slice out before everyone, then sat back down. All right, dig in and enjoy. My sister nearly inhaled her slice, stopping only because she stuffed too much in her mouth at the first bite, and having to take a bit of time to compose herself. My father sliced into his pie, humming happily at the delicious sweetness. I poked at my plate a few times, unable to find the slice as I was staring at Adrian. Adrian calmly picked up his fork and carved away at his slice. He held his fork like any other person would. Or at least that's how I think a normal person would hold their fork. I never paid much attention to how a person held and used their forks before. I never had a reason to. As my fork finally found the pie slice, I brought it up to my mouth, only to feel the bit that I did scoop up fall off the fork and hit the ground. In a brief moment, I looked down at the bit of pie and debated about cleaning it up with a paper towel. It was the right thing to do, and my mother worked so hard on this pie. Leaving it on the floor would be a clear sign of disrespect both to her food and to this household. A part of me hoped that no one else saw that and I could just get to it later. But as that thought came into my mind, Adrian reached across the table and handed me a paper towel.
Whoops! Saw you drop that. Here you go.
His smile was so innocent, like a child reaching out to help someone who fell down. It curled up my insides. Not only did he see me drop it, but now everyone else at the table knew I dropped some. Was it all planned? Did he do something to make me drop it onto the floor? Was there something he was going to do when I was looking down at the floor? Thanks, I said, trying my best to sound sincere. I took the paper towel that he offered and put my fork onto the plate. All I could do was hope that I was quick. I bent down and grabbed at the fallen bit of pie. A squeak. I saw him stand up, and his chair moved and squeaked. He was doing something. I hit my head on the table as I bolted upright to catch him in the act. Aha! I shouted, pointing over at Adrian with the hand with the paper towel while holding the back of my head with the other. Adrian was simply standing upright a little bit, cutting himself another slice of pie. His plate was bare, minus a few crumbs and a bit of cream filling. My breath was heavy as I panted, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. My sister, my mother, and my father all turned towards me, staring and trying to understand what just happened.
You all right?
My father leaned over and rubbed the back of my head.
That sounded like it hurt.
I I could feel all of their gazes on me. My heart was pumping into my ears as I burned from the redness. I cleared my throat and tried to compose myself. The bit of pie was just in a weird spot, but I got it, I said, wadding up the paper towel and putting it on the table. I adjusted myself back into my chair and scooted back into place. Dear, you need to be careful, my mother said with concern on her face. I've hit my head a few times cleaning under there, and it's none too pleasant. I'm fine, I said, taking a breath and picking up my fork. Adrian picked up another piece of pie and sat back down, his chair squeaking as he pulled it back in. Well, make sure the pie goes into your mouth, Adrian said, opening his mouth wide and pointing his fork to it.
Mom worked really hard on this, and I'd hate for it to go to waste. It's absolutely delicious.
Right, I'll be sure to next time, I said, picking up another scoop of pie slice. This time I watched it go into my mouth. He wasn't lying. The pie was absolutely delicious. The five of us continued to eat, the air filled with the sounds of forks clinking and my sister's aggressive eating. Adrian just ate like normal, not a care in the world besides the pie that was in front of him. Before long, the entire pie had been finished. My mother and I had one slice. The rest each had a second. My father stood up from the table.
Well, now, that was a delicious dinner. Shall we finish off the night with some TV?
Like, I got dibs on the remote first. My sister dashed out of her chair, rushing towards the living room. No fair! Adrian shouted as he got up from the table and ran after her. I was about to sprint as well, not wanting to let Adrian out of my sight, when my mother called out to me, Dear, can you help me with the dishes, please? She started to gather up all the dishes from the table.
Go help your mom,
My father said as he stood up from the table, passing his plate to my mother.
I'll make sure that you get the second choice for the TV.
He smiled at me warmly. All I could do was feign a smile back at him. Okay, Dad, I said, trying to fight back the terror sitting next to the pie and pork in my stomach. He left the room, following where Adrian and my sister went. I walked over to the kitchen with my mother. She scrubbed the dishes as I rubbed them dry. Neither of us said anything as we cleaned the dishes. I kept glancing from the dishes in my hand to the entrance to the living room, straining my ears to hear anything, but all I could hear was the sounds of the dishes and the ambient background of the TV. Dear, you are all right. You seem distracted tonight and a little tense, my mother said, pulling my attention. Is everything okay? I took a deep breath. I'm fine, Mom. I pulled together my strength to give her a smile. I had hoped it reassured her, but I could see past it. She shook her head. I'm your mother. You know that you can tell me anything. If something's on your mind, just say it. I bit my lip before taking a deep breath. If I told her, I would just sound insane. She wouldn't believe me. It's just school stress and my head, I lied to her. Things have just been really confusing lately, and to add on to it, my head just really hurts from hitting the table. That's all. Well, thank you for being honest with me, she said as she opened up the freezer and pulled out a bag of frozen peas. She wrapped it up in paper towels before handing it to me. But I know you're one of the smart ones. No matter what happens, you'll be able to get through it. And even if you can't, you've got your family with you. She handed over the utensils and dish from the pie. All right, just finish up drying these last ones, and then you're finished and can come join us for TV time. Thanks, Mom, I said as I gave her a hug. She hugged me back, and that warmth filled my heart. Then she let go and headed off to the living room. I balanced the bag of peas on my head where I had hit it so that I could use both hands to finish drying the dishes. I wiped off the forks and the inside of the pie dish and put them away. Then I picked up the knife used to slice the pie. I turned my gaze over to the living room where my family was, where Adrian was. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room. Ah, there she is, my sister said excitedly. It's not TV time without the whole family together.
Yeah,
My father chuckled.
there's a spot here next to your brother. Take a seat.
I sat down next to Adrian, one hand holding the bag of peas, the other on the handle of the knife in my pocket. Gladly. That is the end of Adrian. Those were the 3 stories that I have for you. I would read Chef, but unfortunately, we do not have the time.
Chef is so long.
Yes,
I
it
made
is.
it long for my portfolio.
So, we're going to end the stream here.
A bit early, because tomorrow's gonna be awesome!
I hope you all enjoy the stories. What was your favorite? Leave a comment below. I will see you all tomorrow for another stream. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope you all have well, be safe, stay lovely, and I hope you all have a very lovely Halloween. Bye, Anara.